Hello and welcome to the first in a series of tutorials on FM sound design. More specifically, I'm going to talk about FM sound design in the context of the Sonicware Liven XFM, the synthesizer in front of me. Let me give you a little overview of what this synthesizer is. It is a 4-operator FM synth and groove box. It has 4 timbres which can be accessed multi-timbrally over MIDI, and it has a 4-track sequencer. There are a number of unique sound design features, most specifically the morphing engines known as XLab, XForm, XLFO, and library, which is non-morphing. I'm going to discuss these initially, and then I'm going to dive into the dedicated FM editing mode. Dedicated FM editing mode is much more relevant to FM sound design in general. So these initial tutorials will be quite specific and then will become more generic. For now, let's get going. I'm going to dive in and describe everything that we have on the panel. So first I'll switch the device on, and that leads me to the top portion of the panel. We have a power button, we have a Volca style power supply, we have a 4-digit text display, we have a sync in and out port compatible with other Sonicware devices as well as Volcas. We have a MIDI in and MIDI out. We have a line in and out. The line in is compatible with stereo or mono audio, as well as the pocket operator mode, where sync is sent along one channel and audio along the other. We have a separate headphone output. Jumping down, we have the keyboard. The keyboard are a series of buttons laid out as 2 octaves plus 3 keys, so that's 27 keys, each of which can be played non-velocity sensitive and has a secondary function. The secondary functions are accessible through the Func button here. The next row above are the sequencer step buttons. As with the keys, there are function buttons to access secondary functions. Secondary functions like picking the type of the effect, the length of the note for the steps in the sequencer, the length of the sequence. Talking about length of sequence, we have 4 tracks selectable here. Each one can be between 1 and 64 beats long, so this allows for polymeter. Additionally, since we can change the length of the note that each step corresponds to, anywhere from 1 4/4 bar to a 32nd of a 4/4 bar, including triplets and dotted notes, we can effectively do some polyrhythm as well. The next row of function buttons allows us to, as I mentioned before, function to access secondary function of the keys, shift to access secondary function of the knobs. The reason for having 2 modifiers here is that I'm allowed to hold down shift and adjust the knob while I'm playing the keyboard. There's a shortcut to lock the shift in place, so this would allow me to access secondary functions of the knobs while still playing the keyboard. The next 4 buttons are allowing us to select the 4 sequencer tracks. Using function, we can mute them. This is a parameter locking button to do electron sequencer style parameter locks. These are octave buttons, but they're also used for selecting banks and as a cursor when editing text in different modes. We have a clear button which can be corded with other buttons to clear things and an OK to confirm that. We have the standard transport control. We have a pattern button allowing us to load a pattern. We've got 4 banks, each of which contains 16 patterns, so that's 64 pattern banks in total. These buttons are used to select the pages of the pattern, so when we are playing, by default the sequencer will follow, the sequencer buttons will follow the playing. This allows us to jump to a particular one with a few secondary functions. From a sound design perspective, the most interesting section is this section here. So these upper 4 buttons are your 4 knobs are your 4 primary sound design modes. We have what we call XLab, XForm, XLFO, and XLibrary. So I'm going to switch over to the library mode. Now these 4 knobs correspond to the 4 words in the library row, meaning the first knob allows us to select a bank, the second knob allows us to select a sound within that bank, the third knob lets us tweak the attack of that sound, And the fourth knob lets us adjust the tone. In FM terms, the tone allows us to decrease the amount of feedback, which generally will make for a softer sound. So let me play the sound that I loaded. So we can see that was a pad sound. I'm going to the next row. We have a cutoff knob. When I turn it, it says off because the filter is not yet activated. So function filter. Now I can pick a filter type and an envelope type. The envelope for the filter is very simple and it's applied paraphonically to that track. So we can see here, low pass filter with a falling envelope. So what I'm going to do is turn the cutoff all the way down, turn the resonance up. I'm going to set the depth to something modest, turn the time down. So I can turn the depth up, turn the cutoff up. So this gives us some interesting sound design potential. I'll come back to this in more detail when we look at the specific sound engines from a sound design perspective. Additionally, we have an LFO. The LFO can affect the pitch of the sound. It can also affect the filter cutoff. We have a dedicated knob to adjust how long the release is, which doubles as a knob to set the effect send rate. These knobs affect the effect parameters. So if I enable an effect, let's say chorus, and this is the secondary function as a send level for this effect, for this track. When changing other parameters, we have an encoder here, which allows us to go through different options. You saw me go through it. So say I wanted a metronome, I would use this encoder to set the value. In FM modes, we actually have two value knobs, which you'll see when we go to the overview, allowing you to use the encoder for fine adjustment or incremental adjustment, and the other knob to make direct changes to the sound. So they're convenient having the duo. Finally, we have a pattern tempo and a global tempo. You can pick whether you're using the global or pattern tempo in the BPM secondary function. And finally, a volume control. So I think that gives us an overview of everything. I will next move on to talking about one of the sound engines, specifically the library sound engine. So thanks for listening.